And I've always maintained that I have a lot more in common with the average vegan than I do with the average consumer who doesn't think about what they put in their mouth, because vegans are generally, a lot of the time, vegan for conscientious reasons. They don't want to be a part of animal suffering. Neither do I. I abhor factory farms, sow stalls, big chicken sheds. I don't want anything to do with them. I've always been an animal lover. And when I went on this food healing journey and doing all this research and started watching some docos and actually questioning what went on inside of our slaughterhouses and different things, I thought, a lot of this stuff, we are not really doing the best we could.
Hello, friends. Thank you so much for joining me again today. I have an excellent guest for you all, and this is a first for the podcast. This is the first time after so many episodes talking about the importance of meat for your health and for the world, and how good it is to eat all this good, delicious food that's real from the earth. We have someone here who is on the ground actually making it for us, making it happen. And people are learning more and more, Jacob Wolki, that meat does not come from the grocery store. It doesn't magically appear on those shelves. And they're learning more and more about the origin story of that meat and people like you who are doing it. So I really appreciate you being here. And Jacob Wolki, why don't you give us a bit of backstory on where you came from, how you came into regenerative farming, and we'll go from there on how your farm is very different.
Sure, Ben. Happy to. Thanks for having me. Just a quick comment on you saying people learning more and more where their meat comes from, and it's not bad for them, that sort of train of thought. I was at a dinner party last night and I said to a friend of mine, I really feel like the last 50 years is going to be this funny silo in the history of the world. I feel like everything we took for granted pre-1970, and I'm talking like we took it for granted for the 10,000 years before that, we're relearning those truths now. And it's like a 50-year Bermuda Triangle of knowledge, just the strangest things. And we can talk about what I meant by that later, because I was bringing in family and church and food and farming and all sorts of stuff into that. But anyway,
it's almost like something crazy happened in 1971, almost exactly 50 years ago, huh?
Absolutely, brother. Yeah. Yeah, that is a very fun, eye-opening rabbit hole indeed. So I'm a farmer, a butcher, family man from an area called Wehrman, which is in southeast Australia. And growing up, I was always plagued with health issues, but nothing like crazy, nothing like seizures and epilepsy and but I'd scratch my legs when I was sleeping because I had all these skin allergies, and I'd scratch my legs to the point that they bled, and then I'd call out for my dad to come peel the sheets off my leg in the morning. And I had respiratory issues. I could never breathe properly. I was always sneezing, itchy eyes, really bad allergies and hay fever, and just sensitive to everything. I remember just thinking like I'm allergic to the world. And my wife and I had not long had our first son. And I went to the GP and I was on 3 scripts at the time. I was on a tablet, a nose spray, and an eye drop to try and get my allergies under control, because at that time I was running the family business, which was a bicycle store. And to be a snotty mess on the sales floor selling, you might be with people for an hour selling them family bikes and electric bikes and stuff. You got snot rolling down your chin, you're sneezing 7 times in a row. Like, it was just I don't even know why my wife married me. I was such a unkept, fluid producing monster. And I just went to the GP and I had a breakdown. I was like, give me steroids, give me some illegal drugs, load me up. And I've been seeing specialists all over the country for years. I've been seeing different GPs. And not once, in retrospect, not once did a GP ever say to me, what are you eating? Are you exercising? What's your sleep like? Are you stressed? What sort of liquids are you drinking? What fibers are you using? What chemicals are you exposing yourself to? Like, not once did I ever get an input or environmental question. It was always like, let's look at your symptom. How does it feel? And how did the last set of drugs work? And, just so sad that that's the status quo. That's the hamster wheel that most people are stuck into. And so I had a breaking point, and I came home and I was really upset. And I said to my wife, I think we need to move town, because I always knew I was better on the coast. And, that's really interesting from a quantum health point of view, because when I was at the coast, obviously my location was different, but I was also working less, so less stressed. I was also barefoot in the water, in the sunshine for hours and hours a day. And, it's just such an interesting, again, another rabbit hole. But my wife's always been a health conscious person, and she was very patient with me. And she said, "Are you ready to stop eating crap and to address the food you're eating?" Because I was on a SAD. We call that the standard American diet, and I call it the stupid Australian diet. What's
not
her
really
name?
much different. Like I've listened to Anthony Chafield. I'm not sure if you know who he is, but he's based in Australia, and he talks about
I know Anthony.
Really they're pretty much the same.
The same.
You guys both spoke at that Regenerate Summit, didn't you?
Yeah, that's right.
You guys were both on there. So, okay, you've connected with him. That's awesome.
Yeah, we've guested on a few podcasts together and stuff. And,
cool.
there's a brilliant author. Her name's Claire. She's a doctor. I can't remember her surname. That's going to tick me off all morning. She wrote the book Deep Nutrition. Claire Shanahan and SAD.
Kate Shanahan. Mm-hmm.
That's right. Yes.
Yep.
The she uses it as an acronym: sad, anxious, depressed, which I just think is so interesting. Anyway, I got the KFC out of my diet. I got the Chinese noodle box out and the flavored milks out of my diet. And I was on a path to restoring my gut health, and all my symptoms went away. And when we went down that clean food rabbit hole, I became really specific. I wanted unadulterated red meat from animals that hadn't been medicated, and they'd been on pastures that hadn't had, fake chemical inputs put on them and poisons put on them. And couldn't find it anywhere. Couldn't find it on supermarket shelves. The butchers had no idea where the meat came from. I went to the farmers markets, and they were selling local grass finished beef, but they were still drenching and medicating their animals and doing a bit of this and a bit of that and preservatives in the snags. And I just said to my wife, we're going to have to do it ourselves. And the property I'm sitting on at the moment is my parents', the 100 acres behind me here. And I asked my dad if I could lease some land off him and push some cows around and follow on with some chickens. I'd had this little Joel Salatin model in my mind, and it was never meant to be production for sales. It was just for home use. And then people just started, I started a Facebook page to document what we were doing. It was a bit of fun, and people started wanting the stuff. And, to this day, we're accumulating customers at a rate of knots, and they're all finding us on a food healing journey. No one comes to me because they've heard we've got the best tasting steak or the texture of this or it's cheap or any of those reasons. People are coming to me on a food healing journey because they've been referenced to me by a local doctor or a podcast or just someone else that's been eating clean and they want clean food. And so that's what we do. Like we take the junk out of food and give it to people who need it. I say I don't produce food for people who want it. I produce food for people who need it. So now we've got a farm business where we do beef, pork, lamb and eggs. We own a butchery in town because that was an obvious bottleneck. So we butcher all of our own stuff in-house now, and we're shipping to 10,000 suburbs across Australia. That's the supply chain that we've tapped into, and we're giving it everything we got.
That's awesome, man. And one of the things that you said there that I highlighted was that doctors are sending people to you.
Yep.
On this podcast, I do, we talk a lot of crap about modern doctors because, like you said, most of them, from your experience and my experience and everyone's experience, is that they are just interested in what drug can they plug in to just keep the pharma machine rolling. And they aren't looking for root causes. But it sounds like some of your customers have had doctors that are waking up and switching things up and actually sending people to the root of their health, which is healthy, good food, which you're producing. So that's super exciting to see. Kudos to them if they're listening. And regarding the way that your business works, I'd love to just touch on what makes it different, because I'd like to start with the regenerative side, just how it operates at that level. And then maybe later we can get into, you have a 24/7 butchery, which is super cool. And then the Bitcoin side, of course, there's Bitcoiners listening as well. So maybe we could start with a general overview of what is regenerative agriculture and how have you applied it?
Well, that's a really contentious question, Ben. You've hit the nail on the head with that one. And I do a fair bit of keynote speaking around the circuit at different some are foodie events, some are ag events, and I normally start at the ag events and I say, who likes the phrase regenerative agriculture? And half the hands go up. And then I say, who hates the phrase regenerative agriculture? And half the hands go up, because farmers are a conservative bunch. And they feel like people that use that phrase are putting them down by proxy. They find it a bit offensive, which I think's, they should ask themselves why that challenges them, I think. And everyone's got their own spin on it. Like, it's not a institutionalized word, it's a fairly new word, and everybody probably means something different. So I preface regenerative agriculture as farming systems that regenerate the commons. And, we all know things like the state forests and the shared waterways, public waterways are our commons. And, Theodore Roosevelt did a lot of work protecting them in American history and championing them. I like to expand on that. We've got shared resources that are commons that aren't as tangible or as easily defined as that. So air, our air quality, you don't own the air around you, but if your neighbor does something to destroy it, it affects you. And I think that's a common resource. It's a great example. The health of our water, our subterranean water, the actual water itself in the waterways and our bores and wells and oceans, they're commons. You can destroy them pretty easily. Manure lagoons seeping into them and bad farming practices, drift and chemicals leaching into them. And soil, you actually own your freehold and the soil's yours. You can put a spade in it and throw it in the air if you want to. But if you're robbing the nutrients out of your soil and destroying its function, you're actually passing the buck downstream to future generations. And that's not fair. So I think soil health is a common resource. And beyond that, community health and wealth. I think to have a functioning, thriving community, you need healthy people and you need sound money. And I think that we should look at health as a community commons. Like, if everyone's constantly sick because we're all addicted to carbohydrates and high fructose corn syrup, the institutional mood of our community is bankrupt. We're a sick species. So I actually think our collective health can be a commons. So I think regenerative farming needs to be farming in a way that repairs those things. It doesn't just bite the status quo. I would like to see farms not just maintaining water, soil, and air and community health, but actually making them better, because that's what a healthy ecosystem does. So that doesn't mean you have to be an absolute purity farmer and everything's 100%, but you're just taking common sense principles, like not having animals in a feedlot and letting them graze like nature intended in a high impact, long recovery period, mimicking the bison roaming across vast plains like ages of old. So there's my spin on what regen ag is.
Yeah, and a big part of that people need to understand that you said just there is that this isn't just, staying neutral on the environment. This is improving it. And I'm sure you have a better idea of this cycle than I do, but people have been so brainwashed out there into thinking that cows are bad for the environment, just existing, because they belch and, that produces methane, so they're bad. Therefore, they're bad for the world. Which is absolutely astounding that this level of idiocy has taken over, because cows are the planet. When you see them walking around just eating grass, doing their thing, I see one in your background right there. I see a little brown smudge, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, I've got I can't really see. There's a few.
Oh, look.
There's a few of my
That's
some
awesome.
of my older breeders there behind me. Yeah, look, we've been sold a lie that animals are bad for the environment. And how can animals are the environment? You don't have healthy functioning ecosystems devoid of livestock. You wouldn't say the desert, it is an ecosystem. Most desert is rainforest land that's collapsed. You wouldn't look at a desert and go, that's a thriving, fertile ecosystem. But you go to a rainforest, there's heaps of animals. You go to beautiful grasslands, there's heaps of animals. Animals are the environment. And this is where that great slogan, it's not the cow, it's the how, comes in. When you start monoculture farming masses of corn and then penning cows up and just feeding them corn all day, you're going to start to have negative environmental effects on both fronts, on the concentrated feeding and on the corn production. But if you just let grass grow there and you control graze those animals over there, you'd be having fantastic environmental effects. So there's nothing wrong with animals. Animals are the environment. It just comes down to management. And, a few things that you don't see in nature is monocultures. So, our farms shouldn't be monocultures. And that's one of the reasons we run mixed species farming. It's more efficient to have one type of animal on your farm. You become a specialist and you can leverage your equipment better and you can buy better, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not what the landscape wants. It wants a varied input system from different animals. So, it's one of the decisions we've made is to run mixed species on our farm. Look, it's not rocket science. You just healthy animals in healthy landscapes. Something I talk about heaps is fit for purpose animals. Behind me here, you can see these are river flats along the Murray River in Albury, which is in Australia, which is the biggest river in Australia. It floods here all the time. We get a big rain event and it floods. And my neighbours, who are lovely people, no shade to them, but they farm goats here. Goats aren't meant to live on river flats. So they're having to bring their goats into the shed 6 to 8 times a year to trim and treat their feet because their hooves are getting soft and they're getting foot rot. The goats are an amazing animal and they get fat as mud in the desert where there's hardly any grass around and their feet don't turn up. So that we've taken a great animal and put it in the wrong spot. That animal's no longer fit for purpose. It is not fit to produce goat on river flats. It's a desert dwelling animal. They should be this is dairy country. Like cattle's feet don't turn up here. They can survive this, no problem. They're fit for purpose for this. So I think if you just start with fit for purpose animals and you look at what your context is and you wind back from that, you're really not having to force anything. And then you're not having to have the reliance on all the chemical inputs and medications to keep animals and systems healthy.
Yeah, it's really just about using our human ingenuity to bring things back to the way that nature actually created in the first place, and not like use this idea of trying to farm in a regenerative way, but do it incorrectly. Like you said, monocropping. I'm glad you brought that up because this is something that, the plant community, like the vegan community, the plant-based community says is that eating plants is better for the environment, but they don't know how it's produced because in order to scale that up to all the plants that they need, let alone even like the factory sludge, impossible meat and fake Beyond Burgers or whatever that stuff is, that's just pure chemicals. But even if you're growing good plants, even organic, I would say, you're having to just completely wipe out the lands and do very unnatural things in order for that to grow. And like you said, the natural way for the land to operate is to be covered in animals that are always just eating the grass, pooping, giving the fertilizer to the soil. The soil improves, the more plants grow, the photosynthesis increases. It changes the whole cycle. And this is the way that the earth actually wants to be. And so it's just, we need to help them bridge that gap. Because I've heard of so many stories. I built a website recently called whycarnivore.com, and one of the sections was all about vegans coming around and going all the way to carnivore, because I've really found that vegans are closer to carnivore than standard American diet people, because they're trying to get healthy or they're trying to do the right thing. They were just fed the wrong information. They just have to do a little bit of self-experimentation and clear up some misconceptions, and then they find out this is actually better for the environment, better for their health to focus on high quality, good meat. And yeah, a little bit of a tangent there, but I just think that's so important for people to understand that these are the kinds of things we need to be focusing on, is just regenerative. I used regenerative agriculture earlier. I probably regenerative ranching is more accurate, because ranching is the meat production, right? I'm still sort of learning this as well.
Yeah, we don't use the word ranching in Australia. That's one of those
Really?
cool American words. Yeah, it's interesting when you say vegans and carnivores are closer together. I've said that for a long time for a few reasons. And one is that they're both, you're predisposed to being an extremist. One only eats vegetables and one only eats meat. It takes a certain sort of person to go down a rabbit hole and limit their diet so heavily. So we're 1 degree of separation away. And I've always maintained that I have a lot more in common with the average vegan than I do with the average consumer who doesn't think about what they put in their mouth, because vegans are generally, a lot of the time, vegan for conscientious reasons. They don't want to be a part of animal suffering. Neither do I. I abhor factory farms, sow stalls, big chicken sheds. I don't want anything to do with them. I've always been an animal lover, and when I went on this food healing journey and doing all this research and started watching some docos and actually questioning what went on inside of our slaughterhouses and different things, I thought, a lot of this stuff, we are not really doing the best we could. Like, this is really not pleasant, watching how we treat some of these animals in some of these situations. So we've really tried to wear animal welfare on our sleeve. We've got our 5 pillars of production at Wolki Farm, and we talk about the 5 pillars being a flywheel, and it's our decision-making matrix. And the first pillar for us is animal welfare. And the framework for that is we need to have animals expressing their nature. So like pigs, I get tours of school kids coming to the farm, and I say, what's the pigness of a pig? What does a pig do? And people start to have like dumb answers after about 12, but kids under 12, it's innate. They roll in mud. They chase each other. They sleep all day. Okay, most pigs in Australia that are raised in factory farms never see dirt in their whole life. And as this is where we talk about inputs, they're on concrete or slatted floors because they never see dirt. When they're a couple of days old, they get grabbed up by the farmer and they get an iron injection in their butt, because without it, they have a deficiency and they'll have muscle issues, and some of them will die. They'll get lame and die from it. You've never heard of a pig on pasture from anyone ever needing an iron injection because they're 2 hours old and they've got their nose in the dirt and they just get it naturally. So there's a really interesting comparison that you take the animal out of its natural environment and rob it from its ability to express itself how it would in nature, and instantly you're needing inputs to keep that animal healthy. So animal welfare for us is fit for purpose animals that are able to naturally express themselves in an environment that mimics where they're from. And I like a huge portion of my customers are people that have been vegans, and I've actually got customers that are still vegan, but they buy their pet food off me. They weren't able to go, they're still on their own ethical journey, and I don't throw any shade at that. Like, it's nice having people in society that are actually thoughtful and not just NPCs on autopilot, right? But they're buying pet food off me because they don't want to be part of a commodity system for what their pets eat. Like, I just think the whole thing's gorgeous. Can't wait to sell them a steak.
They're close. They're moving the right direction.
Yeah. And most of these vegans that come onto this food healing journey and come full circle are women, Ben, because their health collapses. We've been sold this narrative that a steak is a manly piece of meat. Women need steak more than men. Like, what sex bleeds, like, loses blood and iron monthly, and what sex actually grows people inside of them, in 9 months, and then pushes them out of, like, the toll on women's bodies of their, reproduction superpower is immense. Like, it's a real toll. They pay a big price for that. And the best thing for them is nutrient dense intakes. And like, the manliest food you could have is the wombliest. How do you say, what's the feminine version of manliest? I don't even know what that word is.
Womanliest is the best we got.
Womanliest, there's got to be a better phrase. We've got to work on that. But, the best food for a woman is a T-bone steak.
Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned that, actually. I could not agree more. And I was just looking, just skimming through my YouTube channel recently, where I just put all of my podcast episodes. And it occurred to me that the last 5 episodes in a row that I did on just carnivore healing journeys were all women. And I didn't realize that they're like, and I didn't actually count all of them. It's probably roughly even, but there are just so many women out there, like you said, that are having these incredible journeys. And a lot of times they're starting from a worse place because they have that more complex hormonal system. And so they need even more help than the men do. And when you look around, everyone needs help right now, health-wise. People are just sick. But it's so important.
Women are really they're driving it, right? Because women do the buying for the family. Women are the carers. They're traditionally buying the groceries. They're traditionally cooking them. If there's a sick, snotty kid, they're the ones that have it programmed into them to care for the kid and book the doctor's appointment. So they're actually supervising all of this. And beyond that, men can feel crap and just sort of get on with it, understanding it's the status quo. But women actually have a set framework to monitor their hormone cycle. So if their ovulation cycle is out of whack, they can actually, Like they've actually got a reference point in their head. There's something wrong with my hormones, with my health, with my body, with something, because I'm not ovulating the way the textbook taught me that I would. They've actually got a defined marker that they're at it. Like us as men, bit tired, sore tummy, bit fat, like whatever, it's not as apparent. Women are a lot more in tune with that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and until they go to the doctor and they say, "Oh, your problem is you need a birth control pill."
Yep.
So they just throw a pill at it, like we said earlier. And this concept of pills and pharmaceuticals, and I love what you said earlier as well, using the pig analogy of how pigs that aren't in their natural environment need injections. I think that this is a great example that we should touch on. How I think we when we look at the standard grocery store, when I'm looking at the milk or the meat, for example, it says like no RSBT or whatever it is, no this type of drug, no this type of drug. People are advertising they don't give their cows drugs, and it just makes you think like, why are cows even being given drugs in the first place in other environments? And one of the podcasts of yours I listened to was just talking about how for all animals, so just expanding upon that pig example, when they're just given the correct environment, they don't need any of these drugs, injections, or anything. They are healthy, just like humans are. If we give ourselves a healthy environment and live where we're supposed to, then we don't need any of that. And I'd love to hear your take on just the way that the current, I guess, farming environment is right now, where it's just like a standard now. And in some cases, the government even enforces that you have to use drugs on animals now. And it's just gotten so far into that fiat realm, this word as Bitcoiners like to use, of the fact that things are so bad now that the government's even enforcing that you need to have this pill or this injection. It's really a downstream effect of the actual problem. That's kind of a lot of words, but I'm sure you have some interesting thoughts there. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, look, we've got a number of animals on the farm, and I've never medicated any of them for anything. I have used antibiotics a couple times as like a trauma response. If an animal gets cut and the cut gets infected, and what we do in that case is we will give that animal antibiotics to get it back to health. I've tried natural and herbal remedies and before antibiotics, and I've had some really good responses with them. So we sort of make our decision on what to do. But then what we'll do is once the withholding period's over and that animal's fat, we'll sell it off into the commodity market, because we've got a commitment to our customers that we'll never sell the meat that's had antibiotics used on it. And what people really mean when they read that or they put on the label antibiotic free, or most intensive farmed animals like chickens and pigs actually have their food laced with subtherapeutic antibiotics as a preventative. In Australia, they got rid of hormones in pork and chicken production a long time ago, decades ago. In America, you guys are still rife with it. But here, you can use hormones in red meat in Australia. It's not very commonly used because it's expensive. So, you don't, it's not really a big problem here. But when they took it out of chicken and pork production, they just replaced it with antibiotics, which are a growth stimulant. And it's on the front foot. You've got animals in filthy conditions, and you need to give them a tonic to stay on that front foot so they don't get respiratory infections and everything else. But beyond a couple cuts and gashes that cows have accumulated and needed a bit of help with over time, we've never wormed and drenched animals. I've never vaccinated an animal on my farm. And there is an attrition rate in terms of, some animals, because we've raised them so intensively for so long under input methods, some animals can't quite hack the pressure. So we don't let them suffer. We don't persevere with them. We just process them through the abattoir. Sometimes they've got good cuts of meat. Sometimes they just end up in the pet food mints, and that's fine. And we're constantly selecting to the animals that are fit for purpose. Our purpose is natural farming systems where the animals can handle a natural pressure from the environment and thrive in that. And those animals exist. That's one of the reasons we're using Goonie cattle. They're not long. They've only been, I guess, domesticated by whites very recently. Before that, they were farmed by native tribes in South Africa going back thousands of years, and they never had access. They lived very intimately with these animals, and they never had access to the pharmaceuticals and the interventions that we've been using for the last 100 years. So they're a very wild, primal ancestral animal, and they're just in the paddock. They just thrive under, high pressure, non-input systems. So, it's really not that hard. You get farmers up and down defending themselves using all these chemicals, and I just never see any reason to do it. Like, the animals are healthy. At the moment, if I showed you this mob of cows, about 50 cows behind me, they're old cows. Most of them are sort of like 8 or 9 or 10. A few of them have got patches of fur missing. Like, it's cold here this morning. We had a -2 frost, so we're in the last month of winter here in Australia, and they've picked up a lice load. So they've got fleas, right? And the fleas are starting to scratch around on them, and they're rubbing on a tree, which pulls the hair off. It's not killing the animal. They might be a little bit uncomfortable. Next week, we've got a couple 20 degrees Celsius days, and as soon as the weather hits 20 degrees Celsius, all the fleas curl over and die, and the cows will be fine. Like, there's no reason to go put a pour over on them. They're a little bit itchy. It's part of a natural annual cycle, and when the sunshine comes down, they'll all have a nice glossy coat on them, and they'll get on with it.
Just part of a cycle, like everything else.
Yeah.
Like we were talking about earlier, just understanding and respecting nature cycles instead of trying to intervene on everything, which is what I feel like humans do in so many different realms. It seems like every single rabbit hole we go in, like, we talked about Bitcoin briefly, intervening with the money, going to fiat direction instead of letting the natural free market do it. And in nature, there are just infinite examples in nature. And this is such a good example of that, where if you can just mimic the way things do without you, and by creating the environment where it can happen, good things happen. And one of the things we touched on a little bit earlier, I wanted to really highlight here was just the ethical side, because this is another vegan argument we hear about how it's so evil that we kill cows and eat them for food. And I'll give my answer, and I'd like to hear your answer. First of all, when you look at a farm like this, I can literally see the cows in your background living the most amazing life out there. Just a beautiful day. They're eating grass. They're walking around. They're having a ball. How old do cows get most of the time? You said 10 was old. Is like 10 to 15, somewhere in there?
Look, in a conventional farming system, a 10-year-old cow is a very old cow. I think the average age of a cow in a mob of breeders at the moment would probably be 4 or 5, and most cows will be getting culled at 6. A cow can live till 20, and they can be productive until 20, but we've selected for the wrong traits, I believe, as a farming community over time. We've selected for things like growth rate and the wrong sort of phenotype, so they look wrong. We like them to have fat in certain places, but that might not be. That's the place that suits production, but it might not be the place that suits the animal. So these Nguni animals, where farming, it's very frequent for a farmer, very common for a farmer to have a cow 15, 16 years old that's had a calf every year. And that's what we're striving towards. That's part of why would you want to chase traits that gives you a cow that only lasts for 6 years? It just makes no sense.
Absolutely. So, and if we could just do some easy, quick math here, we'll just use 10 years. It's around the middle of that. So 3,650 days of life, for an example, of just an excellent life out eating grass, having a wonderful time. They have one really bad day at the very end. So
and I wouldn't even call it a really bad day, Ben, because the day they die, they get like for us, they get loaded on a trailer, and it's a 1-hour drive to the abattoir, and it's different for the cows. Like, I drive them. I take them myself, and then I unload them down the ramp, and I put them in a pen, and a few hours later, the abattoir so the whole thing might be said and done in 6 hours or 10 hours. So it's not even a whole day. And I think they're probably curious. They're probably a little bit anxious and nervous and looking around, and it's all new to them. But the amount of stress from leaving my farm and then being put in a pen at the abattoir is the same amount of stress. It's probably less stress than they'd go through when they get trucked to the sale yards, and then a different farmer buys them and trucks them home again. We make a big deal about the hauling of them to the abattoir, but it's really just that last 40 seconds where they're being walked up the race. There's probably some loud noises, and maybe they'll smell some blood, and then it's their turn. Like, that's I will submit that is probably not the best part of that cow's life, but the whole process before it, I think that they're just curious and maybe a little bit nervous, but it's not like any we do so much more stuff. We truck sheep from Western Australia to East Coast. It takes 4 days. Like what sort of stress is that on the animal? No one sort of questions it. We always make a big deal about that final moment. I'd love to be able to do on-farm slaughter. That's something as we scale over time and have more volume and cash flow and things that we're going to be working towards. That's one of our long-term goals. I've slaughtered animal. I've shot a cow in the paddock and then hung it up with the tractor forks and butchered it right where it was. And I shot it while it was grazing grass. It had no idea what was going on, and it was a nice thing. There's no doubt that that's the best outcome. But yeah, like the one bad day, it's a common phrase and it's right, but I just sort of like to bring it back a little bit. Like it's not even one whole, it's not a traumatic, it's not 24 hours of trauma. You're not being pinned down and tortured for 24 hours, right? It's like 2 or 3 minutes at the end. That's probably not really that great.
Yeah, and I would say just the bottom line is that they are living a wonderful life, a far better life than they would if they were out in the wild, and they would get just mauled to death by some predator or die of starvation or old age or something like that. Things in the wild, they are getting a privilege by having this life.
That's right. We're the only species that care about the conditions of death, and in nature, you are diseased or killed by predation. Like nothing dies of old age. Like very, very rarely would there be an elk that lays down in a forest and just has its final breath because its organs have given up. Like long before that, it's moving too slow and a pack of wolves have taken it down.
Yeah, that makes sense.
We can articulate that and use that to sort of justify our farming means, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't still have compassion for these animals. Most farmers care a lot, Ben. We can talk regen and this and that. Most farmers that are traditional farmers care a lot for the welfare of their animals, and I think countries like Australia really do a really good job of animal welfare as a whole. It's just it's this intensive farming. It's China's got this 21 level pig farm. It's a 21 story mega farm producing 1 million pigs a year. These conditions are not nice for animals. That's a pig that's going to get born and get processed, within 8 months, and its life's crap the whole time, in my opinion.
And here's a question I know a lot of people have as well, and this is one that someone I know you respect a lot, Joel Salatin, has talked about. I'd like to hear your answer of the scalability. Is it possible to scale this model of regenerative to the masses to a point where we can feed all humans with this?
Yeah, look, it's super contentious, and anyone that says anything is going to get picked apart by studies and opinions and facts. But I think not only is it possible, but it's the only way, inevitably, because we can't be using input systems forever, because the inputs for one system are another system outputs. Like we're fertilizing our fields, and we're so reliant on diesel and fertilizer that we're mining off-site. We've got big lime mines. We're bringing that lime onto our farm, whereas we could just be using sunshine. The sun makes grass grow, and then a cow eats it and craps it out, and we've got our fertilizer right on site. Everybody, like the current way the world's set up now, we're reliant on grain. If you just clicked your fingers and you ended all the grain production, we'd have 80% of the world's population starved to death, because we've been built up on that, and that's what our current system is. But everyone wants to talk about what's more productive, this and that. Everyone's fat. We're probably consuming as a species 50% more calories than we need to be per capita. There's so much food wasted. I own a cafe in town, and the amount of food we scrape into the bin that people leave on their plates, it's just such a wasteful system. The amount of food that supermarkets tip into the skip bin of an evening, I used to go past and pick it out for my pigs. It's just crazy. You've got the most fertile continent on the earth, Africa, and where does all the starvation happen? Like, where's all the big famines? And it's all in Africa, and it's because of geopolitics and supply chain issues. It's not because of production. Like, I think we can absolutely feed the world grazing, but there's a lot more issues than just the actual grazing. There's a lot more different pressure points that need addressing.
The issue of food waste is an interesting one because this is something I have noticed has changed so much for me when I switched over to a carnivore diet from a mixed diet, which was definitely majority plants. Is back when I ate all those plants, it was always a race against the clock to be able to manage to eat all these things before something rotted. And I ended up throwing a lot of things away, even when I hate throwing food away. I hate wasting food. I always have, but it's so hard when you're managing all these different things. When I'm just eating meat, it's really easy to manage that. And I basically just move, a few packs of ground beef or a few steaks from the freezer to the fridge after every meal, and it's just like a cycle. I haven't wasted a
Hmm.
single speck of food for probably, I mean, maybe I'm forgetting some random late night somewhere, but for the last year that I've been a carnivore, I don't think I've wasted anything. I've eaten every single piece of meat I've had. And it's also just knowing that our stomach, our gut, is so acidic. We have the gut of a vulture, basically. So even if meat is like slightly off and it's not completely fresh, our body is made to still be able to digest that. If you eat like a plant that's gone bad, you're going to get really sick. So it's just people understand that this is another, aspect. We're kind of hitting on unintentionally a bunch of those vegan arguments here. Like food waste is a huge, and when you look at those dumpsters, like you talk about of the food being wasted, you talked about the small shop. When you look at the big grocery stores and you look at the food they throw out at the end of the day, it's just a huge mountain of plants because their produce goes bad. They can't do anything with it. And there's just a lot of pieces of that puzzle people don't take into consideration.
Yeah, absolutely. And every time I've jumped in the skip bin or the dumpster and had to dig through to pull out bits and pieces. I used to do a bit of dumpster diving when I was younger, just for fun. The boys and I'd go out on a weekend, have a few drinks, and then you'd go to the supermarket, the shopping center, and you'd jump into their bin, and all the stuff you'd pull out, donuts and yogurt pouches and sushi. Not once did I ever see a piece of meat. You would see everything in there. And, the fact is that the fruit and the vegetables go off so quick that they can't on the supermarket shelf, that they can't keep on top of it. But the meat's refrigerated and it's packaged, and when it's getting close to its use by date, they put a 50% off sticker on it, and who's not going to buy a steak at half price? Never gets thrown out.
Yeah, absolutely. And people
I've
just,
never
I think,
told anyone on a
inherently know.
podcast I never told anyone on a podcast that I used to dumpster dive.
I love it. It's the first for
There was
everything.
one really good skip bin in Albury that I used to always get beautiful sourdough loaves of bread out of. You'd get a trash bag full of like 30 loaves of bread, and each of these loaves of bread were worth like $8 each, and they were just cooked that morning. I used to just hand bread. I used to be the bread man, give everyone some bread.
You could start a little stand close, like just a couple blocks away, just sell it back for a profit. Yeah, I love it. It's hilarious. So, we got about 15 minutes left here. I'm excited to have this be sort of a more concise episode. Sometimes I just go into 2 hour long rants with people. This is a great one to just keep fairly short. So, for the last two parts here, first of all, I like to just talk about the interesting parts of your business, and specifically this butchery that you have. I think I just looked at your Twitter feed earlier, and your pinned tweet is basically a video of you walking through this 24-hour building where people can go buy this meat that you produce anytime they want. It's a very interesting system. So could you walk us through how that works and how that has worked for you, and maybe what
Yeah.
other farmers out there could take from it?
Yeah, so when we purchased our butchery in 2020, we bought it purely to process our beef. So we send it off to the abattoir and it comes back as primals and we butcher it. And I had absolutely no intention of opening a front of house, like a normal butchery where you walk in and buy cuts of meat, because at that time, and even still now, we were not producing enough meat to justify having, like, even if that person standing there sold every single cut of meat we'd ever produce for the month, it wouldn't be enough to justify their wage. I think in the year 2020, we did 400 grand turnover, and we sold everything we produced. So we produced 400 grand's worth of meat. The minimum wage to have someone standing there selling this stuff would be $60,000, $70,000. So it just made absolutely no sense. So it's just a processing center. We're selling things on at that time. Everything was being sold on Facebook. That was our only outlet. But I just kept getting asked for it. When are you going to open the shop? When are you going to open the shop? People didn't understand that it was just a production center, just a boning room. And I'm a big believer in when customers ask for stuff, you've got to give it to them. And I sat down one day with a pen on the back of an envelope. It's what I call our immigrant balance sheet. I just scratched the numbers down, trying to figure out. I just wrote that. I wrote, we're going to do 400K. And it's going to cost 60 to staff it. It just doesn't make any sense. And then I thought, if I didn't have that 60K overhead, it'd work. Like, how could I open a butchery without wages? And that was really what spurred it on for me. I thought I just need to do a walk-in vending machine. I just need to design something that has no wages. And then it doesn't matter if it only does $100 turnover for the day. So I did a bit of research. I found a few apps and programs, and I've worked to sort of stitch them together the best I could. So now we've been running this for 4 years now, and we opened it in the end of 2020. You become a member by doing a farm tour generally. You get a unique PIN code, so you enter that on the door, and the door pops open. You walk in, and we've got 4 big triple door upright freezers, and all the meat's in there cryovac packed and labeled, and you just grab all the meat you want. You use an app on your phone to scan the barcodes on the packages. You pay through the app. It just takes your fiat through Stripe. And there's a few security cameras that are recording the motion censored cameras, and then you let yourself out. And we've got hundreds of members. It's been going really well. We've had no theft. We've had no issues with vandalism. No one's ever left the freezer door open. We've got a highly conscientious customer base, and it's just a joy to run. All I've just got to do is keep those freezers stocked. Day a week, I just fill them up and off we go. So it's my take on a modern day honesty system farm gate.
Yeah, and it's not like you don't have any, cameras around too. You do have cameras just like watching over things, but I'm assuming you never really need them because things just operate well. It's a locked door. It's just like a 24-hour gym. I've heard you use
Yes.
that analogy in previous podcasts as well. I've never heard bad stories about 24-hour gyms. People just get a key and they go in. And another thing is that all of the people that have this service available to them, they are truly a community that really loves this service. So
Yes.
they're going to make sure that no one screws it up.
Well, I think if it was a walk-in butchery, exactly the same system, but you were making claims like we've got the best marbled Wagyu steak, and we've got the best flavored snags, and we've got the cheapest wings, and all these taste and value claims, you'd attract people that would inevitably want to put a steak in their pocket. And our customers find us because they need the food, not because they're sniffing around town for the best value the word value really triggers me a little bit actually. The best taste. It's people who need it. So they respect the system and they don't want to, ruin it. They want the access to the meat. So we've had zero issues. It's such a nice little system, just ticks along. There's one store up in Townsville, which is in far north Queensland, that's mimicked it. We helped them set up, so it's exactly the same system. And I'm currently
I've been there actually in Townsville. I passed through there.
Oh, have you? Yeah, cool.
I lived in Cairns for 8 months up in Queensland.
Oh, there you go.
Back in 2018.
You've experienced
I've road tripped a little bit around that area. Mm-hmm.
You've experienced the worst weather that Australia has to offer. I'm currently consulting for 2 other farms in Australia that are actively wanting to set up the same model. So it's interesting to me that it's my video went viral 2 years ago, and it's taken this amount of time for people to actually start to deploy it, because a lot of people said they would. But I don't mind hiring people, but I want the money to be going towards something valuable. So I'd rather employ people to manage the farm instead of standing behind a counter in a butchery.
Yeah, doing actual productive things. And this is, as Bitcoiners, we understand that, of course we want, the jobs to be flowing, but we want them to be good, productive jobs that are actually doing things that matter. And
yep,
this is
100%.
Something that confuses a lot of folks. They just hear AI has taken our jobs, so therefore AI is bad. No, I think that if these jobs can be done by a computer, then they probably should be. The problem is that the right people aren't getting the benefits of that freed up labor. And that's a whole nother can of worms there. But that is the real problem and why people get angry, because the 99% of people are just getting a worse deal. when like the higher ups in that company are like getting all of the additional benefit. But that's a whole new tangent. um, I'd like to talk a little bit about Bitcoin here for the last 10 minutes, because that is something that you definitely have as a tenet of your business. And I talked with Texas Slim recently about how the Bitcoin and beef connection is really important and how so many farmers out there need to understand Bitcoin. So could you give me the case for how Bitcoin has changed your business and why farmers should get acquainted with it?
Yeah, geez. Well, when I went down the I guess I started going down the crypto rabbit hole and not understanding, the differences between different cryptos. And you do a bit of research and it becomes pretty apparent pretty quickly that they're not all the same. Some are little frogs, and others are actually making like sound economic arguments about hard money, and you sort of sort all that out pretty quick. And I made the decision to start accepting Bitcoin through all of my businesses. And we don't get much through the bike shop and the cafe, but the farm business, we have regular monthly consumers that check out on the website and select Bitcoin as their payment. And then they get an on-chain QR code and they make the payment. And I guess, how's it changed our business? Probably the biggest thing it's really done is just brought me customers that I wouldn't have previously had. Like, there's a lot of people that want to put their Bitcoin to work. There's a big community of holders and stackers and this and that, but there's also people that understand, if it's money, it's got to function, and why not put it to work as money? So they're spending it, and then I can receive it and stack it or spend it. And so, ironically, the people that it's attracted to my business are heavy meat eaters and really appreciate privacy. So I've got a contingent of customers. I don't know their names and I don't know their address because I ship meat to pseudonyms on post locker boxes, and they're just got that degree of separation, and it's pretty fun to cater to that. And I also like the fact that I can earn Bitcoin instead of having to buy it. And Texas Slim talks about this. Like, I'm a entrepreneurial type of person. I'm not an investor. I don't want to have to sit down and I don't squirrel money away. I don't put money into things really. Like, I build businesses with my cash flow. So to be able to receive Bitcoin with something that I've produced and build up an amount that way, for me, has actually been a really nice journey. It just sort of fits in my brain a little bit better, which I spoke to Slim about, and he's really noticed that across farmers. I don't think farming, I don't know. I think the best thing for farmers would to be to actually understand how much fake money has destroyed economies and the businesses that, they're trying to run. The whole system makes no sense. The cost of land in Australia, which isn't even as bad as the cost of agricultural land in America, there's absolutely no case for producing any sort of commodity feed off that land. It just doesn't stack up. It doesn't matter. Like, here in Australia, the land behind me here sells for $10,000 an acre. So if you want to buy that and you go to the bank for a mortgage at 7% interest, you're paying $700 interest a year to pay off that 1 acre. But if you lease the land off your neighbour, the going rate's $100 an acre a year. Like, none of it makes any sense. The whole thing's cooked. And I think just explaining to people that, D-based money has no value, it all starts to click, and then they can, act accordingly.
Yeah, and that's a whole episode in itself, I think, just going through that how the whole process is quite a result of fiat money. As we talked about, we joked earlier how 1971 was a pivotal year when we went off the gold standard and the government took complete control of the money supply, where they can just print it all they want, and everything just got worse from there. And one of the things that has absolutely gotten worse is the quality of our food and the way that subsidies are all divvied up around, and there's just all kinds of funny business now, and none of it helps the people like you who are actually growing good food holistically, regeneratively, and forming these small communities. It seems more and more we hear these stories of the government just coming and trying to crack down on these places and saying, oh, like, you're not filling your animals with poison that we mandated, so you have to shut your farm down. It's just total madness right now. And the whole reason that that's happening is because they just have too much power. When you have power over the money and power over all the regulations, and they own the regulatory agencies, there's not going to be a good outcome from that. So I'm really glad that your answer was actually different than I was expecting. Just the fact that accepting Bitcoin just brings you new customers you wouldn't have normally gotten. That's a great reason. It'll be interesting to see how that changes over time, because I do believe, and I'm sure as you studied this as well, and seeing all these other cases as someone dialed in like yourself, watching the social media stories, how there are more cases where Bitcoin and just financial sovereignty becomes critical for people in these small businesses to be able to survive and withstand these attacks from the state. And it'll be very interesting to watch. I would love to just do another episode, a few years down the line, or maybe even months or just even shorter time, as things really begin to change, because I think we can both sense there are a lot of things changing in the food system right now. You have a great community there. People love your product, and it's just fantastic to see people like you just fighting the good fight. And with that, we're getting pretty close to the end here, Jake. Why don't we wrap things up here? Give us a message of why people should care about this sort of project, this regenerative style of making food, and why people should care about it, and how they can support it as well as your farm.
I'll answer that by addressing my previous comment that the word value triggers me. I think why people should be interested in getting involved in what we do is because it's fantastic value. Now, if you look at the price, the upfront price of what we produce, it's more expensive than what you can purchase elsewhere. And a lot of the reasons why it's more expensive is because there's no externalized cost. There's nothing being subsidized downstream. So we're not polluting groundwater and air and eroding soil and having all these negative environmental impacts that are downstream for us. They're all taken care of on farm, and those commons are being enhanced. Our meat's not artificially cheaper because animal suffering's picking up the tab by confinement feeding them and medicating them. So the animal's not subsidizing it for you. Your health for a lot of people is going to improve. Like the amount of people that buy our food and say we couldn't eat eggs before because we broke out in hives, a skin rash. We couldn't digest pork. It gave us indigestion and stomach cramps. A lot of people are not able to eat red meat. I had one customer that threw up every time she ate commodity meat, and then she started eating our beef, and she was fine. So you've got another sort of hidden cost. You mightn't see your health benefit from this sort of input. It might take some time. How many people have been on a poor diet and their body sort of starts falling apart in their 60s and 70s because they haven't looked after themselves? So our food might be more expensive, but I think it's better value because there's no externalized negative costs for the environment, animal welfare, and your own health. So I think that's one great reason to get involved in regen ag and supporting chemical-free food. If people want to find us, we ship nationwide in Australia through wolkifarm.com.au. I'm on Twitter at Jake Wolki. We're on Facebook and Instagram, Wolki Farm, and Twitter's where all the spicy stuff happens, and Facebook's a bit more family friendly.
Excellent, man. It has been an absolute pleasure having you on, my friend. I really appreciate you taking the time. This is probably going to be my first of many episodes, just talking to farmers like yourself who are out there just doing the real hard work on the ground, and we appreciate you so much. I know I can speak for all of my carnivore friends who love good meat. And I have a whole list of things I didn't even touch on here that I'd love to talk about in the future. So we'll for sure keep in touch, my friend.
Yeah, let's do a part 2. Thanks for having me, Ben.